June 29, 1974. Darmstadt, West Germany. A book lies open on a desk. Admiral Karl Dönitz stares at page 117 of the ultra-secret, a memoir that has just reached German bookstores and is already shaking the foundations of post-war history. His hands, aged, weathered, once accustomed to command, grip the edges of the volume. Beside him, an aide quietly translates the English text. The words reveal a truth that contradicts everything Dönitz has believed for 30 years. From May 1940 onward, we were reading German naval, army and air force communications almost as quickly as the Germans themselves. At 83 years old, the last leader of the Third Reich and former commander of Germany's U-boat fleet sits in stunned silence. According to the aide present, the color drains from Dönitz's face as the meaning becomes clear. For decades after the war, he had blamed Allied radar, superior resources, and technological advantage for the destruction of his submarine arm. The truth is far more devastating. Every order he transmitted to his U-boats, every tactical innovation, every desperate attempt to win the Battle of the Atlantic, had been read by British intelligence, often before his own commanders received it. Days later, in a hastily written letter to the book's publisher, Dönitz attempts to reclaim certainty. "I had always suspected this," he writes. But those who knew him recognized the claim as hollow. Throughout the war, whenever subordinates raised security concerns, Dönitz dismissed them without hesitation. Enigma cannot be broken. Now, sitting alone in his modest apartment near Hamburg, the full weight of the deception overwhelms him. 783 submarines lost. More than 30,000 sailors dead beneath the Atlantic. All because the encryption system he trusted with absolute faith had been systematically compromised, beginning in the third year of the war. The mathematics that were supposed to guarantee Enigma's security, more than 3 times 10 to the power of 114 possible configurations, had meant nothing against Polish mathematicians, British cryptanalysts, and early computing machines he never knew existed. Every decision, every operational order, every innovation had been transparent to an enemy reading Germany's most secret communications. The confidence of numbers. German cryptographers believed Enigma was unassailable. The standard 3-rotor Wehrmacht Enigma offered 17,576 rotor positions, multiplied by 60 rotor arrangements, producing more than 1 million primary configurations. When plugboard connections were added, over 150 trillion possibilities, the total number of settings became astronomical. To German mathematicians, the conclusion was unavoidable. Breaking Enigma was not merely unlikely. It was impossible. Dr. Erich Houtenhain, head of OKW Chi, the Wehrmacht's Cipher department, understood that Enigma could theoretically be attacked through mathematics. But as he later told Allied interrogators during the 1945 TICOM investigations, he could not imagine anyone attempting it. This was not arrogance. It was calculation. Based on the technology of the 1930s, testing every Enigma setting would require teams of trained cryptanalysts working continuously for periods longer than the age of the universe. Even if the enemy captured Enigma machines, without the daily key lists distributed in heavily guarded codebooks, each day's settings would still require thousands of specialists working around the clock. To German planners, the effort was irrational. Absolute security. The Kriegsmarine took extraordinary precautions. Admiral Dönitz enforced the strictest cryptographic discipline in the German military. Naval Enigma operators trained for months at the Naval Signals School in Flensburg-Murik, learning not only how to operate the machine, but how to protect it. Codebooks were printed in water-soluble ink on pink paper, designed to dissolve within seconds. Weighted disposal bags ensured they would sink instantly. U-boat commanders carried personal sidearms with standing orders to shoot any crewman who failed to destroy cryptographic material when capture seemed imminent. In February 1942, the Navy introduced the 4-rotor M4 Enigma, codenamed Triton. To German naval intelligence, this represented the final evolution of cryptographic security. With 8 rotors to choose from, and a fourth rotor adding another layer of complexity, the number of possible configurations increased 26-fold. German cryptanalysts at Bedienst tested their own system relentlessly. After 100 days of failure, Vice Admiral Erhard Mayertens reported to Dönitz with absolute confidence. "Our cipher does not appear to be broken. The case was closed. The signs no one accepted." Yet in 1941 and 1942, troubling patterns began to appear. They should have triggered alarm. Instead, each was explained away. Radar, reconnaissance, bad luck. Anything except the possibility that Enigma had been compromised. The first warning came in the spring of 1941. Between March and June, the Royal Navy destroyed 7 of 9 German supply ships hidden in remote areas of the Atlantic, vessels positioned to refuel surface raiders and U-boats. The Belchin was found north of the Azores on March 3. The SO Hamburg was destroyed 2 days later. Egeland and Nordmark followed soon after. These ships had been placed in locations so isolated that chance discovery was statistically negligible. Yet Captain Ludwig Stummel of Bedienst concluded that British success was due to improved radar and systematic ocean patrols. The possibility that the British were reading German position reports was never considered. Then came the Bismarck. Germany's most powerful battleship was hunted down with uncanny precision after breaking into the Atlantic. Reports reached Luftwaffe General Hans Jeskenek that British aircraft seemed to know exactly where to search across the vast North Atlantic. He dismissed the concern without hesitation. "It is impossible that the enemy is reading our ciphers." Nowhere was the catastrophe more evident than in the Battle of the Atlantic. From late 1941 onward, U-boat losses climbed steadily, despite new tactics and new technology. On January 12, 1942, Dönitz recorded his bafflement at the interception of supply submarine U-459, destroyed 800 nautical miles west of Freetown, in an area where discovery seemed impossible. Berlin's response was unequivocal. "An insight into our cipher does not come into consideration." The numbers told a grim story. In 1941, Germany lost 35 U-boats. In 1942, despite the 4-rotor Enigma, losses rose to 85. By 1943, they would reach catastrophic levels. And still the truth remained unspoken. 237 submarines destroyed in a single year. In May 1943 alone, Black May, as German submariners would call it, 41 U-boats were sent to the bottom. More than 1/3 of all boats at sea were lost in just 30 days. Yet even now, German analysts found explanations that avoided the unthinkable. When convoys began taking seemingly impossible evasive actions, slipping past wolf packs with uncanny precision, Admiral Dönitz blamed Allied aircraft equipped with new radar systems. When U-boats were caught on the surface with disturbing frequency, German scientists proposed an extraordinary theory: that the British had developed radar capable of detecting submarines at ranges of up to 60 nautical miles. Such technology did not exist. But to German minds, it was still more believable than the idea that Enigma had been broken. The blind spot. As losses mounted, German intelligence launched investigation after investigation, each more exhaustive than the last. Each shared the same fatal flaw: the absolute assumption that Enigma was secure. The most revealing inquiry began after the capture of U-570 on August 27, 1941. Damaged south of Iceland, the submarine surrendered to a British Hudson bomber. There was a real possibility that it had been taken intact, along with its cryptographic material. Captain Ludwig Stummel of Bedienst was assigned to assess the damage. His investigation was meticulous. He interviewed survivors, reviewed the boat's final transmissions, reconstructed the timeline of its capture. In his October 1941 report, Stummel acknowledged the theoretical danger. If the British had captured an Enigma machine and the current codebooks, they could, in theory, read German naval traffic. But he immediately dismissed the possibility. "The suspicion of compromise of our secret operations cannot be justified." Our cipher does not appear to be broken. His reasoning seemed airtight. Even if the British had captured the machine and keys, the daily key change on November 1st would end their access. And protocol demanded that all cryptographic material be destroyed. It had to be assumed the crew had done its duty. What Stummel could not know was that 3 months earlier, on May 9, 1941, U-110 had been captured intact. The submarine that changed the war. The boarding party from HMS Bulldog, led by Sub-Lieutenant David Barmy, found the radio room untouched. Codebooks lay open on the table. The Enigma machine was still warm. Among the captured materials were officer-only signal keys and the short signal codebooks, which revealed how German operators compressed messages to defeat Allied direction finding. It was the intelligence coup of the naval war. And Germany never realized it had happened. The last investigation. In the spring of 1943, after the catastrophe of Black May, Dönitz ordered the most comprehensive security review of the entire war. He was desperate to understand why his wolf packs were being annihilated. The investigation team, led by Korvettenkapitän Meckel, examined every conceivable explanation. Their first theory focused on METOX radar warning receivers carried by U-boats. German scientists suggested these devices might be re-radiating signals, unintentionally broadcasting submarine positions. Tests confirmed the fear. A Focke-Wulf 200 Condor, equipped with detection gear, found that METOX emissions could be detected at ranges of over 100 kilometers. All U-boats were immediately ordered to stop using radar detection equipment. Losses continued. Next, investigators considered infrared detection. Perhaps Allied aircraft could see the heat signatures of diesel engines. A crash program began to develop infrared-absorbing paint. Returning U-boats were hastily repainted. The losses did not stop. Then, on February 3, 1943, a crashed RAF bomber near Rotterdam revealed something extraordinary. An intact H-2S radar system. German scientists were stunned. The British had developed centimetric radar, operating on wavelengths German detectors could not see. Another emergency program began. The first Naxos radar detectors reached U-boats in September 1943. Still, one explanation remained conspicuously absent. The impossible hypothesis. As Admiral Harold Martini, head of naval intelligence, had reasoned years earlier, breaking Enigma would require a perfect chain of improbabilities. Captured machines. Current keys. Knowledge of procedures. Officer-only signals. Enough time before keys changed. Each event was unlikely. Together, Martini concluded they were impossible. Germany's own success reinforced this belief. B-Dienst had achieved remarkable breakthroughs against British naval codes. Captain Hermann Göring and his team had broken British Naval Cipher No. 3, used for convoy communications. By late 1942, they were reading up to 80% of intercepted British convoy messages, often within hours. Germany's most gifted naval cryptanalyst, Wilhelm Trano, could predict convoy movements 10 to 20 hours in advance. U-boats were positioned with deadly precision. To German intelligence, this confirmed their worldview. If code-breaking required such immense effort, over 5,000 personnel at its peak, then surely the British faced equal or greater difficulty attacking Enigma. What they failed to understand was devastatingly simple. While the Germans celebrated reading convoy routes, the British were reading everything else. U-boat positions, patrol zones, refueling plans, tactical innovations, even Dönitz's personal assessments sent to Hitler. Germany was winning tactical victories while losing the strategic war. The cruel irony. In the spring of 1943, B-Dienst's success actually accelerated German defeat. Reading British convoy signals, Trano positioned wolf packs perfectly. But the British were reading both sides. They routed convoys around the wolf packs, while sending hunter-killer groups directly toward the waiting submarines. German commanders celebrated their code-breaking triumphs. Their U-boats sailed into carefully prepared traps. Captain Heinz Bonatz later wrote of his growing suspicions. Convoys altered course at the last possible moment. Supply submarines were caught at remote rendezvous points. It was as if the enemy could see our operations unfolding. When he raised these concerns, the response was always the same. Enigma's security had been mathematically proven. Ultra, the secret that could not be exposed. The intelligence derived from broken Enigma traffic had a name. Ultra. Protecting it became one of the greatest deception operations in military history. Winston Churchill famously called Bletchley Park the goose that laid the golden eggs but never cackled. He understood that the strategic value of reading German communications far outweighed any single tactical victory. Ultra was guarded with extraordinary discipline. In 1940, Group Captain Frederick Winterbotham, under CIS Chief Stuart Menzies, established the Special Liaison Unit system. Eventually, 40 SLUs operated worldwide. Each officer was personally vetted. Each signed the Official Secrets Act. Violation meant execution, for treason even after the war. At Bletchley Park itself, secrecy bordered on obsession. 9,000 people worked in total compartmentalization. Those in Hut 8, breaking naval Enigma, knew nothing of Hut 6, which handled army traffic. Translators rendered German messages for years without knowing their source or their significance. Deception on an industrial scale. To conceal Ultra's existence, the British built layers of illusion. The first cover story involved a fictional spy network, Boniface, supposedly run by an anti-Nazi German officer in Berlin. When Ultra intelligence was used, reconnaissance flights were staged to provide plausible discovery. After destroying an Italian convoy bound for North Africa, British intelligence sent a message using a cipher they knew the Germans had broken, thanking a non-existent agent in Naples. The most delicate deception was restraint. Attacks were timed only after plausible sightings. Refueling submarines were allowed to gather before being struck, so discovery would appear accidental. Sometimes Ultra demanded terrible sacrifices. The case of Coventry. On November 14, 1940, German bombers devastated Coventry, killing 568 civilians. A myth later emerged, that Churchill knew the city was the target and allowed it to burn to protect Ultra. The truth was more complex. Enigma decrypts revealed Operation Moonlight Sonata, but identified 5 possible targets. Only hours before the raid did radio beam navigation confirm Coventry. Defensive measures were taken, but evacuation was impossible. The myth itself became part of the deception. March 25, 1941. In Hut 8, a young woman named Mavis Lever, later Mavis Beatty, stared at intercepted Italian naval messages. After 16-hour days, patterns suddenly aligned. The message was brief and electrifying. March 25th is day -3 for the operation. Mavis understood immediately. The Italian fleet was planning a major sortie. Working through the night with Margaret Rock, she decoded the full battle plan. Admiral Angelo Iacchino would sail with the battleship Vittorio Veneto, 6 heavy cruisers and 17 destroyers. Their target, British convoys between Egypt and Greece. The intelligence reached Admiral Andrew Cunningham in Alexandria within hours. On March 27, Cunningham played golf, deliberately, at the Alexandria Sporting Club. Italian spies reported no signs of preparation. That night the British fleet sailed. Cape Matapan. The Italians never knew they were sailing into an ambush. British torpedo bombers struck first, damaging Vittorio Veneto and crippling the cruiser Polar. When Zara and Fiume returned to assist, they sailed directly into British battleships at point-blank range. In minutes, 2 cruisers and 2 destroyers were annihilated. More than 2,400 Italian sailors died. Admiral Iacchino survived and explained the disaster the only way he could. Radar, reconnaissance, luck. The possibility that the British had been reading Italian naval orders for days never entered Axis analysis. The impact was immediate. Hitler, already skeptical of surface navies, saw Matapan as proof the Mediterranean was a British lake. The Italian fleet would never again attempt a major offensive operation. And still, the secret remained intact. May 18, 1941. 11:30 p.m. At Bletchley Park, the teleprinter in Hut 8 suddenly clattered into life. A German naval message had been intercepted. Harry Hinsley, a 21-year-old Cambridge undergraduate turned cryptanalyst, recognized its significance instantly. The message came from Admiral Gunther Lütjens, aboard the battleship Bismarck. He reported his departure from Gotenhafen, modern Gdynia, on Operation Reinübung, an Atlantic commerce raiding mission. The British Admiralty had been waiting for this moment for months. The greatest threat at sea. Bismarck represented the most dangerous surface threat Britain had faced since the war began. Armed with 8 15-inch guns, equipped with advanced fire control systems, she could destroy any British cruiser and outrun any battleship capable of fighting her. If Bismarck reached the Atlantic shipping lanes, the consequences would be catastrophic. But forewarned by ultra-intelligence, the Royal Navy had time to act. A choreographed hunt. Admiral Sir John Tovey positioned the home fleet for interception. Force H under Admiral James Somerville steamed north from Gibraltar. The cruisers HMS Norfolk and HMS Suffolk took station in the Denmark Strait with explicit orders: shadow the target using their new Type 284 radar. Every movement was calculated. Every decision based on intercepted German communications. When Bismarck was finally sighted on May 23, the British portrayed the discovery as a chance encounter by Suffolk. In reality, Ultra had revealed not only Bismarck's route, but her exact timetable. Victory before the battle began. The destruction of HMS Hood was a tactical shock the British had not anticipated. But strategically, the outcome was already sealed. Bismarck was damaged. Leaking oils. Tracked continuously by radar-equipped shadowers. And her position was being refined by ongoing Enigma intercepts. Then, on May 25, Admiral Lütjens made his fatal mistake. Believing contact had been lost, he transmitted a long radio message to Naval Group West, describing damage and intentions. The transmission lasted over 30 minutes. British direction-finding stations plotted his position. More importantly, the message was decoded at Bletchley Park within hours. Bismarck was heading for Brest. She lacked fuel for evasive maneuvering. The final act was inevitable. The end of Bismarck. Catalina flying boats, accidentally, sighted Bismarck exactly where Ultra predicted. Swordfish torpedo bombers from HMS Ark Royal, operating at the edge of their range in appalling weather, scored the decisive hit. Bismarck's rudder jammed. On the morning of May 27th, the battleships HMS King George V and HMS Rodney closed in. They reduced the pride of the Kriegsmarine to wreckage. Of 2,221 sailors, only 114 survived. The wrong conclusion. Grand Admiral Erich Rieder, commander of the German Navy, struggled to understand the disaster. How had the British maintained contact across thousands of miles of ocean? How had they concentrated overwhelming force at precisely the right moment? His investigation reached a familiar conclusion. British radar, naval aviation, technological superiority. In his memoirs, written years before Ultra was revealed, Rieder blamed mechanical failure and a lucky torpedo hit. Luck, he insisted, had decided the outcome. He never suspected the truth. May 1943, the illusion of victory. By May 1943, Admiral Dönitz commanded the largest U-boat fleet in history. 116 submarines prowled the North Atlantic, organized into wolf packs with predatory names. Fink, Finch, Amsel, Blackbird, Mise, Tit, Star. German cryptanalysts were reading British convert codes. Dönitz believed victory was near. The enemy is showing signs of exhaustion. He wrote on May 1st. One final effort will sever the Atlantic lifeline. What he could not know was that Bletchley Park had just solved the final puzzle. The Cipher breaks. After a 10-month blackout caused by the four-rotor Enigma, British cryptanalysts finally mastered the M4 naval cipher. Captured codebooks from U-559, recovered at the cost of sailors' lives. And the world's first programmable electronic computer, Colossus, had restored full access to German naval traffic. The slaughter began immediately. Convoy ONS-5. On April 28, U-650 sighted convoy ONS-5, 42 merchant ships sailing from Liverpool to Halifax. Dönitz concentrated 3 wolf packs, 41 submarines for the attack. The British read every order. They reinforced the escorts. They positioned hunter-killer groups. For 6 days, battle raged across 600 miles of ocean. German submarines sank 13 merchant ships. But the cost was devastating. 7 U-boats were destroyed. U-192 was depth-charged by HMS Loosestrife. U-638 was rammed by HMS Sunflower. U-125, U-531, U-438, U-630, and U-528 followed. For the first time, the exchange rate favored the Allies. The massacre. As May progressed, every convoy battle followed the same pattern. Reading German deployment orders, the Allies routed convoys through gaps, while directing hunter-killer groups straight to Wolfpack assembly points. Aircraft using Lee lights caught submarines charging batteries at night. Ships armed with Hedgehog mortars achieved kill rates that shocked even their own commanders. Convoy HX-237 destroyed 3 U-boats without losing a single ship. Convoy SC-130 sank 5 submarines and suffered no losses. The escort carrier USS Bog, operating with perfect ultra-intelligence, destroyed 6 U-boats in 6 weeks. Veteran commanders died in waters they once ruled. Black May. In May 1943, Germany lost 41 submarines. Nearly a quarter of its operational fleet. 7 were destroyed by aircraft in the Bay of Biscay. 6 were sunk while refueling at rendezvous points revealed by Ultra. 12 were destroyed by escorts that seemed to anticipate every move. The youngest victim was U-209 on its first patrol, lost with all 50 hands on May 7th. The most experienced was U-192, whose commander had survived 12 patrols, destroyed on May 6th. The Battle of the Atlantic was over. Germany just didn't know it yet. On May 24, 1943, Karl Dönitz issued the order that effectively ended the Battle of the Atlantic. All U-boats were to withdraw from the North Atlantic convoy routes and regroup in waters southwest of the Azores. In his war diary, Dönitz recorded the moment with stark clarity. "We have lost the Battle of the Atlantic." He attributed the defeat to Allied radar, aircraft, and overwhelming industrial capacity. He never suspected that his own communications had choreographed the destruction of his fleet. A secret almost exposed. One of the most extraordinary aspects of the ultra-secret was how close the Germans came to uncovering it, only to be deliberately misdirected by Allied intelligence. The most sophisticated deception involved a network known as the Lucy Ring. Operating out of neutral Switzerland, it appeared to be a Soviet intelligence operation with unprecedented access to German military secrets. At its center was Rudolf Roessler, codenamed Lucy, a German refugee and publisher living quietly in Lucerne. From 1942 onward, Lucy supplied Soviet intelligence with astonishingly precise information, particularly on the Eastern Front. His reports included full Wehrmacht orders of battle, detailed offensive plans, and, most remarkably, verbatim excerpts from Hitler's operational directives. The intelligence was so accurate, so timely, that both German and Soviet analysts believed it could only come from the highest levels of the German High Command. German counterintelligence was alarmed. The Abwehr and Gestapo launched repeated investigations, suspecting a major traitor within the Wehrmacht. Senior officers were scrutinized. Operations staff were interrogated. Those with access to Enigma traffic fell under suspicion. Yet the investigations always failed. Because there was no traitor. Intelligence laundered. Lucy's information did not come from German insiders. It came from Bletchley Park. The British faced a delicate problem. The Soviet Union desperately needed ultra-intelligence to counter German offensives, but Stalin deeply distrusted British motives. Directly sharing ultra risked exposure through Soviet communications, which were far less secure and heavily infiltrated. The solution was elegant. Ultra-intelligence was selectively passed to Swiss intelligence, which fed it to Roessler under the cover story of anti-Nazi officers inside the Wehrmacht. Roessler transmitted it to Soviet intelligence through his handler, Alexander Rado. The Soviets believed they had an independent source. They acted with confidence. The Germans, discovering Lucy's uncanny accuracy through their own agents, launched investigations that pointed everywhere, except Bletchley Park. Ultra remained protected. Evidence ignored. Throughout 1943 and 1944, evidence of Allied foreknowledge accumulated to levels that should have been undeniable. Yet German investigators, bound by their faith in Enigma's security, always found alternative explanations. The destruction of U-boat supply submarines, the so-called milk cows, was the most obvious example. These vessels operated at secret refueling points in remote areas of the Atlantic. Their locations were known only to U-boat command and the submarines they were scheduled to supply. Between June and August 1943, 10 of 14 supply submarines were destroyed, most at their exact refueling coordinates. U-459 was sunk on July 24 while refueling U-117, over 500 miles from the nearest shipping lane. U-489 was destroyed on August 4, at coordinates transmitted only 48 hours earlier. Captain Hermann Moer, investigating the losses, wrote, "The probability of chance discovery is mathematically negligible. Either the enemy possesses detection capabilities beyond our understanding, or we have a serious breach of security." Yet his investigation focused exclusively on human intelligence. Crew members, neutral observers, enemy agents near French bases. The possibility that the British were simply reading German position reports was never seriously entertained. Innovation neutralized. Even more damning evidence came from the speed with which Allied forces countered new German weapons. When Germany introduced the acoustic torpedo in September 1943, designed to home in on escort propellers, the Allies deployed effective countermeasures almost immediately. The explanation: captured torpedoes. When U-boats adopted short-burst radio transmissions in 1944, compressing messages into fractions of a second, Allied forces still located them with disturbing accuracy. The conclusion: new direction-finding equipment. Every answer avoided the central truth. An outsider notices. The most perceptive observation came not from German intelligence, but from Japan. The Japanese naval attaché in Berlin, Captain Yoko Tadashi, analyzed Allied operations in 1944 and reached an unavoidable conclusion. He reported to Tokyo, "The precision of enemy intelligence suggests they are reading German communications. This appears impossible given German security measures, but no other explanation fits the evidence." His report was intercepted and decoded by American cryptanalysts. At Bletchley Park there was brief concern. But German naval intelligence dismissed the Japanese warning as face-saving, an excuse for their own failures in the Pacific. The tragedy of Karl Dönitz. Karl Dönitz remains the most tragic figure in the story of German cryptographic blindness. Widely regarded as a brilliant tactician and inspirational leader, his very competence became his downfall. His greatest innovation, centralized command, became the instrument of his fleet's destruction. From headquarters in Lorient, Paris and later Berlin, Dönitz personally directed Wolfpack operations. Every U-boat reported its position, fuel state, torpedo inventory and contacts. Dönitz orchestrated attacks like a conductor leading a symphony. This required constant radio communication. Exactly what Bletchley Park exploited. More than 70 messages a day flowed from his headquarters, each one intercepted and decrypted. They revealed not just positions but future intentions. patrol patterns, tactical experiments, strategic thinking. Yet Dernitz's faith never wavered. When questioned, he cited mathematics. Enigma was unbreakable. German radio discipline was unmatched. Short signal codes defeated direction finding. His war diary records frustration, but never doubt. Convoys evading capture. Escorts appearing at impossible moments. Aircraft striking without warning. Always the same conclusion. Radar. Aircraft. Resources. Never once did he write the obvious sentence. They are reading our mails. To admit that perhaps the most damning proof of German institutional blindness came on August 10, 1943. On that day, Swiss intelligence, neutral, cautious, and widely regarded as reliable, issued an explicit warning that should have triggered immediate alarm within the German Naval Command. Through sources that remain classified to this day, the Swiss intelligence service had learned that Allied cryptanalysts had succeeded in breaking German naval communications. The warning, delivered through diplomatic channels to Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, was unambiguous. Over the past months, Germany's naval ciphers used to transmit operational orders to U-boats have been compromised. These orders are currently being read in their entirety. The German response revealed not ignorance, but psychological denial. When Admiral Karl Dönitz was informed of the Swiss report, he recorded his reaction in his war diary on August 13. Report from Switzerland claims the enemy is reading our cipher. This is unbelievable. Another security review was ordered, but with its conclusion already decided. The investigation, led by experienced naval officers, dismissed the Swiss warning as Allied disinformation, supposedly intended to undermine German confidence in Enigma. The committee's reasoning was revealing. If the Allies were reading German communications, they argued, why had they not achieved even more devastating victories? Why did some convoys still blunder into wolf packs? Why did U-boats occasionally escape destruction? The answers were simple. The Allies deliberately allowed certain losses to preserve their secret. But German investigators could not conceive of such restraint. They assumed an enemy who possessed omniscience would exploit it fully and immediately. The idea that intelligence superiority could be strategically rationed never entered serious consideration. Instead, counterintelligence focused on the source of the Swiss warning itself. Investigators concluded it must have originated from Allied agents seeking to sow paranoia within the German command. The possibility that Swiss intelligence had merely observed the obvious, that Allied operations demonstrated clear foreknowledge, was dismissed outright. This failure of imagination was fundamental. German cryptanalysts still worked with paper, pencils, and mechanical calculators. The concept of electronic computation, machines capable of testing thousands of Enigma settings per hour, belonged in their minds to science fiction. By contrast, Bletchley Park had become the world's first industrial-scale code-breaking factory. By 1944, its secret heart was Colossus, the first programmable electronic computer. Designed by engineer Tommy Flowers, Colossus could process over 5,000 characters per second, a speed German mathematicians would have considered impossible. Alongside it, the bomb machines, developed from Polish foundations by Alan Turing and Gordon Welchman, tested more than 17,000 Enigma settings in under 20 minutes, work that would have taken human analysts months. The organizational scale was equally unimaginable. By war's end, more than 9,000 people worked at Bletchley Park, nearly 80% women, operating machines, transcribing intercepts, cataloging decoded messages, and maintaining vast cross-referenced archives. 3 shifts worked around the clock, processing over 3,000 intercepted messages per day at peak capacity. This was not cryptanalysis as art. It was cryptanalysis as industry. Every decoded message was indexed. Operator habits were tracked. Repetitive phrasing was catalogued. Weather reports provided predictable entry points. Careless radio operators reused phrases, nicknames, even girlfriends' names. The British exploited not genius alone, but system, scale, and persistence. When German cryptanalyst Dr. Erich Houtenhain was interrogated in 1945 and informed of Bletchley Park's size, his response captured the gulf between the two approaches. No wonder you broke it. You treated cryptanalysis like building aircraft mass production. We treated it like poetry. German blindness nearly shattered in November 1943, when a British Lancaster bomber was shot down near Berlin. Among the wreckage, investigators discovered a partially burned document containing German naval grid references, U-boat positions dated just 48 hours earlier. The coordinates matched the actual locations of 3 submarines with terrifying accuracy. The intelligence was far too precise for reconnaissance, espionage, or chance. The officer assigned to investigate concluded, after exhaustive but misdirected analysis, that the British must possess a vast network of agents reporting U-boat movements from French ports, supplemented by direction finding on radio transmissions. The possibility that the document reflected decoded German position reports was mentioned only briefly, then dismissed. Cryptographic compromise has been ruled out by technical experts. At Bletchley Park, the incident caused alarm. Emergency protocols were activated. For months, ultra-intelligence was distributed only with elaborate cover stories, and some information was deliberately withheld to avoid exposure. The secret held. Its greatest triumph came on June 6, 1944. Despite the largest amphibious invasion in history, German forces were strategically blind. Through Ultra, the Allies knew not only German dispositions, but German beliefs. Every assessment by Field Marshal von Rundstedt, every intelligence estimate submitted to Hitler, was read in Britain, often before German commanders had decrypted their own copies. This allowed deception on an unprecedented scale. Operation Fortitude, the plan that convinced Germany the invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais, succeeded because the Allies could monitor German reactions in real time. When doubts surfaced, new false evidence was introduced. When confidence wavered, it was reinforced. Even after Allied troops stormed Normandy, German intelligence continued to believe it was a diversion. Hitler withheld armoured reserves for 7 critical weeks, guided by assessments the Allies themselves had shaped. German commanders were not merely surprised. They were being manipulated. By late 1944, the evidence should have been undeniable. U-boats equipped with snorkels were still being destroyed. New torpedoes were countered almost immediately. Tactical innovations failed within weeks of deployment. Yet every investigation reached the same conclusion. Enigma was secure. When the war ended, Allied intelligence teams raced across Germany in Operation TICOM, capturing cryptographic personnel before documents could be destroyed. During interrogation, disbelief gave way to shock. When Houtenhain was shown decoded messages, he could only repeat. This would require thousands of people, resources beyond imagination. They had never imagined an enemy willing to devote such effort. For German veterans, the revelation in 1974, when Ultra was finally declassified, was devastating. Battles once explained by material inferiority were revealed as intelligence failures. Acts of heroism had unfolded in operations already known to the enemy. One former U-boat commander summed it up simply. Then we never had a chance. Ultra did more than shorten the war. It transformed warfare itself. For the first time in history, one side possessed near-total visibility into the mind of its enemy. Plans, intentions, movements, laid bare in real time. The tragedy was not that Enigma failed. The tragedy was that faith in its perfection made that failure unthinkable. When convoys repeatedly evaded wolf packs, German commanders blamed expanding Allied air coverage rather than confronting a more disturbing possibility, that U-boat patrol positions were known in advance. The very compartmentalization designed to protect Enigma instead prevented any comprehensive assessment of security. Cryptographers assured radio operators that the system was mathematically unbreakable. Operators assured commanders that procedures were being followed. Commanders assured high command that communications were secure. No one was responsible for questioning the system as a whole, and anyone who tried faced powerful institutional pressure to conform. German technical pride became a critical vulnerability. A deeply ingrained belief in the superiority of German engineering and mathematics created blind spots that evidence could not penetrate. When convoys maneuvered with impossible precision or supply submarines were intercepted at remote coordinates, investigators searched for increasingly elaborate explanations: radar breakthroughs, infrared detection, espionage networks. anything except the simplest answer. The Allies might possess superior cryptanalytic capabilities. Throughout the war, warnings arrived with remarkable consistency. Each one represented an opportunity to uncover the truth. Each one was dismissed. In February 1942, the German naval attaché in Tokyo reported that the US Navy appeared to have foreknowledge of Japanese operations. Berlin dismissed the report as an excuse for Japanese failures in the Pacific, never considering that if American cryptanalysts could read Japanese codes, they might also be reading German ones. In August 1943, Swiss intelligence issued a stark warning. German naval codes had been compromised. The German response was not to investigate the claim itself, but to investigate the Swiss. The conclusion was that neutral observers had been manipulated by Allied disinformation, never that they had simply recognized the unmistakable pattern of Allied foreknowledge. Even within German intelligence agencies, suspicions were actively suppressed. When a B-Dienst analyst documented statistical impossibilities in convoy routing, his report was buried with a note stating that mathematical analysis alone could not determine intelligence sources. When U-boat commanders reported that convoys seemed to anticipate their movements, they were instructed to improve radio discipline, not to question encryption security. The greatest irony of the Enigma story lies in German success. While Germany remained blind to Enigma's compromise, its own cryptanalysts achieved remarkable victories. B-Dienst broke British convoy codes, intercepted American diplomatic traffic, and penetrated Soviet communications. This success should have demonstrated that no encryption was invulnerable. Instead, it reinforced blindness. German cryptanalysts understood how difficult code-breaking was. They knew how often it failed, how many resources it consumed, and how fragile success could be. They projected these limitations onto the Allies. If Germany struggled to break Allied codes despite enormous effort, they reasoned, how could the Allies possibly defeat Enigma? Wilhelm Trano's success against British convoy codes convinced him he understood the limits of cryptanalysis. He knew that even with captured codebooks, access was intermittent and fragile. What he could not imagine was that the Allies had industrialized cryptanalysis, transforming it from an intellectual craft into a production system. Ironically, German tactical intelligence successes accelerated strategic defeat. Convoy locations obtained through broken Allied codes were transmitted to U-boats via Enigma, providing Bletchley Park with perfect cribs. Every tactical victory became another key that unlocked German communications. After Ultra was revealed in 1974, German military historians undertook sweeping reassessments of the war. The results were devastating to traditional narratives. The defeats of the Afrika Korps, once attributed to logistics and numerical inferiority, were revealed as intelligence failures. Rommel's supply ships were intercepted because the Allies knew precisely when and where they would arrive. His tactical innovations failed because Montgomery knew his plans before German division commanders did. The Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history, was reinterpreted through the lens of Ultra. Soviet defenses were not merely brilliant, they were informed. German timing, strength, and objectives were known weeks in advance through British intelligence passed covertly via the Lucy spy ring. The failure of the Atlantic Wall followed the same pattern. German defenses collapsed not because of Allied material superiority, but because every weakness was known and exploited. Rommel's obstacles, Rundstedt's reserves, Hitler's assumptions, all were transparent to an enemy reading their most secret communications. Even German victories required reassessment. The initial success of the Ardennes offensive in December 1944 owed much to bad weather that temporarily disrupted Ultra distribution. Once communications resumed, Allied commanders knew exactly where German spearheads were heading. In the late 1970s, aging German intelligence officers finally spoke openly. Their reflections revealed not incompetence, but psychological blindness. "We were too clever for our own good," admitted Heinz Bonatz, former head of B-Dienst. "We saw patterns that suggested compromise but explained them away with increasingly complex theories. The simple truth that they were reading our messages was too terrible to accept." Dr. Erich Houtenhain later reflected, "The mathematics were correct. Enigma was unbreakable given the resources we imagined possible. We never imagined the British would treat cryptanalysis as a national survival priority." Otto Kretschmer, Germany's most successful U-boat commander, offered the most haunting assessment. We believed we were warriors. In truth, we were victims of blindness. Every patrol was compromised before it began. For families of German veterans, Ultra forced painful reckoning. Sacrifice once framed as heroic resistance was revealed as service conducted under fatal deception. Some rejected the truth. Others found solace in knowing their losses were not failures of courage. The Bundeswehr absorbed the lesson deeply. Post-war German doctrine abandoned assumptions of cryptographic invulnerability. Communications were fragmented, layered, minimized. Radio silence became doctrine. The trauma of Enigma produced an intelligence culture that assumed compromise as the default. Ultimately, the Enigma failure was not technological. German mathematics were sound, procedures were rigorous, personnel were brilliant. The failure was institutional and psychological. Certainty became dogma, pride resisted doubt, compartmentalization prevented synthesis, and the cost of accepting the truth, that every plan, every order, every sacrifice had been transparent, was simply too great to bear. In his final interview, an elderly Karl Dönitz summarized the tragedy with quiet clarity. The greatest enemy in war is not the opposing force, but certainty. The Enigma machine now stands in museums, admired for its elegance and complexity. But it is also a monument to the danger of believing something is unbreakable simply because we cannot imagine it being broken. The Allies did not merely break Enigma. They broke it so completely, and concealed it so perfectly, that their enemy never realized his thoughts were an open book. That silence, maintained by thousands for decades, may be the greatest intelligence achievement in history. And the lesson remains timeless. In war, in intelligence, and in life, what destroys us is often not ignorance, but certainty.